The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in April 1883, informing Eleanor Thorne that she was a widow before she had ever truly been a wife. And somehow the news felt less like grief, and more like the final confirmation that joy had never been meant for her anyway. She stood in the small room above the Mercantile in Santa Fe, New Mexico, holding the thin paper with fingers that did not tremble because she had learned long ago not to waste emotion on inevitabilities. Her husband of 3 months, Gerald Marsh, had been killed in a mining accident in Colorado. They had married in January, a practical arrangement brokered by her aunt who insisted that at 22, Eleanor was running out of time to secure a respectable future. Gerald had been 47, businesslike, and entirely uninterested in her beyond the domestic services she could provide. He had left for Colorado 2 weeks after their wedding, promising to send for her once he struck it rich. The telegram also informed her that Gerald had died with debts exceeding any assets, and that his creditors would be seeking recompense. Eleanor folded the paper carefully and placed it in her reticule. She owned one trunk of belongings, $17, and absolutely no illusions about her place in the world. Her aunt's voice drifted up from the Mercantile below, sharp and irritated as always. "Eleanor, those crates will not unpack themselves." Eleanor descended the narrow stairs, her black dress already serving as mourning clothes, though she had worn it simply because it was the most practical of her 3 dresses. Her Aunt Miriam stood behind the counter, counting coins with quick, efficient movements. "Gerald is dead," Eleanor said quietly. Miriam looked up, her expression flickering through several calculations before settling on practiced sympathy. "Oh, my dear, how tragic." She paused. "Did he leave you anything?" "Debts." The sympathy vanished. "I see. Well, you can stay here for another week while you sort out your affairs, but I cannot afford to keep you on without compensation. You understand?" Eleanor understood perfectly. She had understood her entire life that she was a burden, an obligation, a problem to be solved. Her parents had died of fever when she was 8, and she had been passed between relatives like an unwanted heirloom ever since. Each home had made it clear that her presence was a charity they could barely afford, that her existence was an imposition. She had learned to make herself small, to expect nothing, to believe that happiness was a gift given to others but never to her. "I understand," Eleanor said. "Thank you for your generosity, Aunt Miriam." She spent that afternoon in the Mercantile's back room, looking through the Santa Fe newspaper for any opportunities. Her eyes caught on an advertisement that seemed almost too desperate to be real. "Housekeeper needed for ranch in Hachita, New Mexico. Room and board provided. Inquire at the telegraph office." Hachita was in the far southwestern corner of the territory, a small settlement near the Mexican border that Eleanor knew only by reputation as a rough, isolated place where cattle ranchers and cowboys carved out hardscrabble livings. It was the kind of place where a widow with no prospects might disappear entirely, which suited Eleanor just fine. Disappearing seemed preferable to continuing this exhausting pretense of existing. She sent a telegram that evening, and by Thursday morning, she received a response. The position was hers if she could arrive within 2 weeks. Wages would be $20 per month plus room and board. The ranch was owned by a man named Franklin Oakes, and she should take the stagecoach as far as Deeming, then arrange transport to Hachita from there. Eleanor packed her trunk, said a brief goodbye to her aunt, and used most of her remaining money to purchase a stagecoach ticket. By Friday, she was rattling south across the New Mexico territory, watching the landscape grow increasingly sparse and unforgiving. The other passengers, a merchant and his wife, tried to make conversation, but Eleanor's quiet, One-word answers eventually discouraged them. She did not have the energy to pretend at pleasantness. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, worn down by a lifetime of being unwanted. The journey took 4 days. The stagecoach stopped in small towns and way stations where Eleanor ate sparingly and slept poorly. When they finally reached Deeming, she stood in the dusty street with her trunk beside her and asked at the general store about transport to Hachita. Hachita, the store owner said, scratching his considerable beard. That's another 30 miles south. You might wait for the mail wagon, but that will not come through until next week. Or you could see if any of the ranchers heading that direction might give you a ride. Eleanor waited on the store's front porch, sitting on her trunk, watching the traffic of Deeming move past. Cowboys rode by on dusty horses, wagons creaked along the rutted street, and the afternoon sun beat down with relentless intensity. She was contemplating the very real possibility of walking 30 miles when a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, miss. I could not help but overhear that you are heading to Hachita." Eleanor looked up and found herself meeting the eyes of a man who was smiling at her with such open, genuine warmth that she almost looked away from the unfamiliarity of it. He was tall, lean in the way of men who made their living through physical labor, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that looked like it had been recently trimmed. His eyes were an unusual shade of blue-green, the color of shallow water, and they crinkled at the corners as he smiled. He wore typical cowboy attire, worn denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. He could not have been much older than her, perhaps 25 at most. "Yes," Eleanor said carefully. "I am seeking transport there." "Well, that is fortunate. I am heading back to the Oaks Ranch just outside Hachita this afternoon. If you do not mind riding in a supply wagon, you are welcome to join me." His smile widened. "I am Franklin Oaks, by the way. I believe you are Eleanor Thorne. I received your telegram." Eleanor stood quickly, smoothing her dusty skirts. This was her new employer, and she had been sitting on her trunk like a vagrant. "Mr. Oaks, yes, I am Eleanor Thorne. Thank you for the opportunity. Call me Frank, please." Mr. Oaks makes me sound like my father, and that is a comparison I try to avoid. He said it lightly, still smiling, and Eleanor did not know how to respond to the easy friendliness in his voice. "Let me get your trunk. The wagon is just over at the livery." He hefted her trunk as though it weighed nothing and started walking, glancing back to make sure she followed. Eleanor hurried after him, confused by his demeanor. In her experience, employers were stern, distant, demanding. This man seemed almost cheerful. The wagon was indeed loaded with supplies, crates and sacks filling the bed. Frank secured her trunk among them, then helped her up onto the bench seat before climbing up beside her. He took the reins of the 2 sturdy horses hitched to the wagon and clicked his tongue, setting them into motion. They rode in silence for several minutes while Eleanor tried to understand what she had gotten herself into. Frank seemed content with the quiet, still wearing that slight smile as he guided the horses down the rough road leading south from Deeming. The landscape stretched out in all directions, vast and empty, dotted with scrubby desert plants and distant mountains. Finally, Frank spoke. "I should probably tell you a bit about the ranch and what the work involves, so you know what you are getting into." "That would be appreciated," Eleanor said formally. "It is just me and 4 ranch hands right now. We run cattle, about 200 head at the moment, though I hope to expand in the next few years. The house is nothing fancy, but it is sturdy. 3 bedrooms upstairs, kitchen and sitting room downstairs. There is a separate bunkhouse for the hands. What I need is someone to handle the cooking and the general housekeeping, laundry, mending, that sort of thing." The hands are good men, but none of us are particularly skilled at domestic tasks, and we have been living like bachelors for too long. I can do all of that, Eleanor assured him. She had spent her entire life performing such tasks for various relatives. Do you have a wife, Mr. Oakes? Frank, he corrected gently. And no, no wife, it has just been me since my father passed 2 years ago. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you, though to be honest, my father and I were not close. He was a hard man. Frank said it without bitterness, just as a statement of fact. What about you? The telegram mentioned you were recently widowed. I am sorry for your loss as well. Eleanor did not want to lie, but she also did not want to explain the truth of her brief, loveless marriage. Thank you. It was very sudden. These things often are. Frank was quiet for a moment, then said, If you do not mind my saying so, you seem quite young to have already been married and widowed. I am 22. Old enough. I suppose so. I am 24 myself, and people keep telling me I should be thinking about settling down and starting a family, as if finding the right person is as simple as deciding to do it. He shook his head, amused. Sorry, I am talking too much. My hands always tell me I am too friendly for my own good. Eleanor did not know what to say to that. Friendliness was foreign to her, something other people possessed. She folded her hands in her lap and watched the desert pass by. After another silence, Frank tried again. Have you ever been to this part of the territory before? No. It is quite different from Santa Fe, more isolated, rougher, but there is a certain beauty to it if you learn to look for it. He gestured toward the landscape. See those mountains there? Those are the Hatchet Mountains, and in spring, after the rains, the desert blooms. Wildflowers everywhere, all these colors you would not expect. It is something to see. Eleanor glanced at the mountains, then back at her hands. Beauty seemed irrelevant. She was here to work, to survive, nothing more. Frank seemed to sense her lack of interest because he stopped trying to make conversation and focused on driving. Eleanor felt a small twist of something that might have been guilt. He was being kind, and she was being ungracious. But kindness always came with expectations, and she had learned not to trust it. The journey took most of the afternoon. The sun was lowering toward the western horizon when they finally approached Hatcheta, a small cluster of buildings that barely qualified as a town. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, and perhaps a dozen houses scattered around. Frank guided the wagon through and continued south for another 2 miles until they turned onto a narrow track leading toward a collection of structures nestled against a rise of land. The ranch house was, as Frank had said, nothing fancy. It was a single-story adobe structure with a wooden porch across the front, sturdy but plain. Behind it stood a barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the orange-lit desert. Frank pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and jumped down, then came around to help Eleanor descend. His hands were rough and warm when they gripped her waist to lift her down, and Eleanor stiffened at the unexpected contact. He released her immediately and stepped back. Sorry, should have given you warning, he said easily. Let me get your trunk and I will show you the house. 4 men emerged from the bunkhouse as Frank was unloading the wagon. They were all older than Frank, weathered by years of outdoor work, wearing expressions of curiosity as they looked at Eleanor. Frank introduced them quickly. This is Eleanor Thorne, our new housekeeper. Eleanor, these are my hands, Jim, Robert, Miguel, and Thomas. Gentlemen, I expect you to be on your best behavior. They greeted her with nods and muttered acknowledgments, their eyes assessing but not unkind. Jim, who seemed to be the oldest, said, It will be nice to have decent meals again, madam. Welcome to the ranch. Thank you, Eleanor said quietly. Frank carried her trunk into the house, and Eleanor followed. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, but clean enough if cluttered. The front door opened into a sitting room with a fireplace, a worn sofa, and several chairs. Beyond that was a kitchen with a large table, a wood stove, and open shelves holding dishes and supplies. Everything was functional but clearly lacking a woman's touch. "Your room is upstairs," Frank said, leading her up a narrow staircase. There were 3 doors on the upper floor. He opened the first one, revealing a small room with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the front of the property. "I hope this suits you. The other 2 rooms are mine and a spare. There is a pump out back for water and an outhouse about 50 yards behind the house. I know it is not much." "It is fine," Eleanor said, and she meant it. The room was more than she had expected, private and clean. "Thank you." Frank set her trunk down at the foot of the bed. "Why do not you get settled in, and I will start unloading the wagon. Supper is usually around 7 if you are up for cooking tonight. Otherwise, we can make do with whatever we can scrounge up." "I can cook," Eleanor said. She wanted to be useful immediately, to prove her worth before anyone could question whether hiring her had been a mistake. "You sure? You have been traveling all day, I am sure." Frank smiled at her again, that same warm, open expression that confused her. "Well then, I will leave you to it. If you need anything, just holler." He left, closing the door behind him. Eleanor stood in the middle of her new room, listening to his footsteps descend the stairs and then the sound of the front door closing. Slowly, she sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. This was her life now. This small room in this isolated ranch in this harsh desert. She would cook and clean and do laundry and mend clothes, and in exchange, she would have a place to sleep and food to eat and $20 a month. It was more than many women had. It was more than she deserved, probably. Eleanor unpacked her trunk methodically, hanging her 3 dresses in the small closet and placing her few belongings in the dresser. When she was finished, she went downstairs to examine the kitchen and determine what she could prepare for supper. The supplies were basic but adequate: flour, beans, salt pork, dried beef, onions, potatoes, coffee. She found a large pot and started preparing a stew, working with the efficient, practiced movements of someone who had been cooking for others her entire life. As the stew simmered, she explored the rest of the house. The sitting room needed dusting, the floors needed sweeping, the windows needed washing. She started making mental lists of all the work that needed doing, all the ways she could make herself indispensable. Frank came back inside as evening fell, followed by the 4 ranch hands. They all removed their hats and boots at the door, then made their way to the kitchen table. Eleanor ladled stew into bowls and set out a plate of cornbread she had quickly made while the stew cooked. The men ate with appreciation that seemed genuine, making sounds of approval and helping themselves to seconds. Frank sat at the head of the table, still smiling slightly, and thanked her twice for the meal. "This is the best thing I have eaten in months," Jim said, sopping up the last of his stew with cornbread. "Madam, if you can cook like this every day, we might never let you leave." "I am happy it meets your approval," Eleanor said quietly. She had not sat down to eat with them, instead standing near the stove, ready to refill bowls or fetch anything needed, Frank noticed. "Eleanor, are not you going to eat? I will eat after." "Nonsense. Sit down and have supper with us. You have been working since you arrived." He gestured to an empty chair. Eleanor hesitated. In her experience, housekeepers did not eat with the family or the ranch hands. But Frank was looking at her expectantly, and the others seemed unbothered by the idea, so she served herself a small portion and sat at the far end of the table. The conversation flowed around her, the men talking about cattle, grazing land, a fence that needed mending, plans for the coming weeks. Frank participated easily, but Eleanor noticed that he also asked questions, listened carefully to the hand's opinions, and seemed to value their input. He was not an authoritarian boss, but something more collaborative. It was strange. After supper, the hands thanked her and returned to the bunkhouse. Frank helped her clear the dishes, carrying them to the counter despite her protests. "You do not need to do that," Eleanor said. "It is my job." "I do not mind. I have been washing my own dishes for 2 years." He started pumping water into a basin. "Besides, it gives me a chance to talk to you without the whole crew listening in." Eleanor began washing the dishes, her hands moving automatically. "What did you want to talk about?" "Nothing in particular. I just wanted to make sure you are settling in all right, that everything is acceptable. Everything is fine. Thank you." Frank leaned against the counter, watching her. "You are very formal." "I believe in maintaining proper employer and employee relationships." "Sure, that is important, but we are also going to be living in the same house, so it seems like we should at least be friendly." He paused. "You know, you do not have to be so guarded here. I am not going to bite." Eleanor focused on scrubbing a pot. "I am not guarded. This is simply who I am." "All right," Frank said mildly, but he sounded unconvinced. "Well, if you need anything, my door is always open, literally. I leave it ajar at night in case of emergencies, so if something comes up, just call out. I will keep that in mind." He lingered a moment longer, as if he wanted to say something else, but then he just wished her good night and headed upstairs. Eleanor finished the dishes, banked the fire in the stove, and did a final check of the kitchen before going up to her room. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The house creaked and settled. She could hear Frank moving around in his room, the soft thud of boots being dropped, the creak of bed springs. Eleanor stared at the ceiling and wondered how long she would last here before something went wrong, before her inadequacy became apparent, before she was sent away to find yet another temporary refuge. It was only a matter of time. It always was. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn, as was her habit. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to start breakfast. The kitchen was cold, so she rekindled the fire in the stove and put coffee on to boil. She found eggs, bacon, and potatoes, and started preparing a large breakfast for 6 people. Frank was the first to appear, emerging from his room as the sky outside was just beginning to lighten. He came into the kitchen yawning, his hair mussed, still pulling his suspenders up over his shoulders. When he saw Eleanor already working, he stopped in surprise. "Good morning," he said. "You are up early. Breakfast will be ready soon." "I can see that, but I usually do not expect people to start working before the sun is even up." He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table watching her work. "Did you sleep all right?" "Well enough." "That is good." He sipped his coffee, then said, "You know, you do not have to prepare breakfast for everyone every single day. We are capable of fending for ourselves some mornings." "It is my job." "Your job is to help out, not to work yourself to exhaustion." He said it gently, but there was a hint of concern in his voice. "I do not want you to feel like you have to be perfect all the time." Eleanor did not respond to that. Perfection was the only way to ensure she was not a burden, that she earned her keep. Anything less would prove what she had always known, that she was not good enough. The ranch hands arrived as she was plating the food, and they ate with the same appreciative enthusiasm as the night before. Frank tried several times to engage Eleanor in conversation, asking her opinion on various small matters, but she kept her responses brief and polite. After breakfast, the men headed out to start their work day. Frank paused at the door and said, "I will be working on the fence in the north pasture today. If you need me for anything, send one of the hands to fetch me. I will be fine." "I know you will," Frank said, smiling, "but the offer stands anyway." Eleanor spent the morning cleaning the house thoroughly, sweeping and mopping floors, dusting furniture, washing windows. The work was satisfying in its own way, the tangible proof of her usefulness. By midday, the house looked transformed, clean and orderly. She prepared a simple lunch and rang the bell Frank had shown her to call the hands in from the fields. They ate quickly and headed back out, but Frank stayed behind for a moment. "The house looks amazing," he said, looking around the sitting room. "I had forgotten it could look like this. It just needed attention." "Well, you certainly have an eye for it." He hesitated, then said, "Listen, I need to ride into Hachita this afternoon to talk to the man at the general store about some supplies. Would you like to come along? You could see the town, maybe pick up anything you need." Eleanor's instinct was to refuse. She had work to do, laundry and mending and supper preparations. But something in Frank's expression, hopeful and kind, made her pause. He was trying to be considerate, trying to make her feel welcome. The least she could do was accept graciously. "That would be acceptable," she said. "Thank you." Frank's smile widened. "Great. I will have the wagon ready in half an hour." They rode to Hachita in the afternoon heat, the wagon rattling along the dusty track. Frank pointed out landmarks along the way. A dry creek that ran only during the monsoon season, a distinctive rock formation, the boundaries of neighboring ranches. "That is the Peterson Ranch over there," he said, gesturing to the east. "Samuel Peterson is a good man, been ranching here longer than anyone, and to the west is the Martinez spread, run by 3 brothers. We all help each other out when needed." "That is kind," Eleanor said. "It is necessary out here. We are too isolated to survive without cooperation." Frank glanced at her. "Have you always lived in towns, or have you spent time in rural areas before?" "I have lived in various places. My parents died when I was young, so I moved between relatives." "That must have been hard, never having a stable home." Eleanor shrugged slightly. "It was what it was." Frank seemed to sense she did not want to elaborate, so he changed subjects, talking instead about the ranch, his plans for expansion, the challenges of raising cattle in this arid climate. Eleanor listened without contributing much, watching the desert landscape pass by. Hachita was as small as it had seemed when they passed through the day before. Frank stopped the wagon in front of the general store, a weathered building with a sagging porch. He helped Eleanor down, his hand steadying her waist briefly before releasing her. Inside, the store was dim and cluttered, shelves packed with everything from canned goods to tools to bolts of fabric. An older man stood behind the counter, his face breaking into a smile when he saw Frank. "Frank Oakes, good to see you, son. Heard you hired yourself a housekeeper." "News travels fast," Frank said, amused. "Mr. Henderson, this is Eleanor Thorne. Eleanor, this is William Henderson. He runs the store and knows everyone's business before they do themselves." Henderson laughed. "Guilty as charged. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Thorne. Welcome to Hachita." "I hope Frank is treating you well." "He is," Eleanor said quietly. "Good, good. Now, what can I do for you folks today?" Frank discussed supplies with Henderson while Eleanor browsed the store. She did not need much, but she found herself drawn to a display of ribbons near the window. They were frivolous, impractical, the kind of thing she never allowed herself. Her fingers hovered over a blue one the color of morning glories before she drew her hand back. She did not need ribbons. "You like that one?" Frank's voice came from beside her, making her start. He had approached silently while she was lost in thought. "It is pretty," Eleanor admitted, "but I do not need it." "Maybe not need, but want." Frank reached past her and picked up the blue ribbon. "Let me get it for you. Consider it a welcome gift." That is not necessary. I know it is not necessary, but I would like to. He was already walking back to the counter, adding the ribbon to his order before Eleanor could protest further. When they left the store, Frank handed her the small package containing the ribbon. For you. Eleanor took it, feeling strangely overwhelmed by the small kindness. Thank you. You are welcome. Frank loaded the supplies into the wagon, then paused. There is one more stop I would like to make, if you do not mind. The church. I promised Reverend Matthews I would fix a loose board on the steps. They walked the short distance to the small white church at the edge of town. The Reverend, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and thinning hair, greeted them warmly. While Frank examined the steps and made the repair, the Reverend engaged Eleanor in gentle conversation. Are you settling in at the Oaks Ranch, Mrs. Thorne? Yes, thank you. Frank is a good man. The whole community thinks highly of him. His father was difficult, but Frank has become the kind of man who helps others without expecting anything in return. The Reverend smiled. We are fortunate to have him here. Eleanor glanced at Frank, who was hammering a board into place, his movements efficient and sure. He seems very kind. He is, though I worry about him sometimes. He takes on too much, tries to solve everyone else's problems while ignoring his own. The Reverend's expression grew thoughtful. He deserves happiness, but I am not sure he believes he does. His father did a lot of damage before he passed. Eleanor did not know how to respond to that. The idea that someone like Frank, who seemed so comfortable in his own skin, might harbor doubts and pain was foreign to her. He seemed like everything she was not: confident, cheerful, at ease with the world. Frank finished the repair and stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. All done, Reverend. That should hold for a good while. Thank you, Frank. You are always such a help. The Reverend turned to Eleanor. I hope to see you at services on Sunday, Mrs. Thorne. Perhaps, Eleanor said noncommittally. They drove back to the ranch as the sun lowered toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Frank was humming softly to himself, some tune Eleanor did not recognize. He seemed content, at peace. You are always smiling, Eleanor said suddenly, surprising herself by speaking her observation aloud. Frank glanced at her, that smile appearing again as if summoned. Am I? Yes, I have noticed. You smile at everything. I suppose I do. Is that strange? It is unusual. Frank was quiet for a moment, considering. My father rarely smiled. He was angry most of the time at the world, at the ranch, at me. After he died, I decided I did not want to live like that. Life is hard enough without making it worse by being miserable all the time. He looked at her directly. What about you? When was the last time you smiled? Eleanor thought about it and could not remember. I do not know. That seems like a shame. Smiling serves no practical purpose. Does everything have to serve a practical purpose? Frank asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. What about joy? What about happiness? Those things are not for everyone. Why not? Eleanor did not have a good answer for that, or rather, she had an answer, but it was too complicated and too painful to articulate. She believed, deep in her bones, that happiness was a limited resource distributed unequally, and that people like her were simply meant to exist on the margins, performing necessary functions but never participating in the larger joys of life. It was not self-pity, exactly. It was just the truth as she understood it. I do not know, she finally said. Frank looked like he wanted to pursue the topic, but he let it drop, returning his attention to the road. When they arrived back at the ranch, he unloaded the supplies while Eleanor went inside to start supper. She prepared chicken and dumplings, using a recipe she had learned from one of her aunts, and set out fresh biscuits and butter. The hands praised the meal enthusiastically. And even Frank mentioned twice how good everything tasted. Eleanor accepted the compliments with quiet thanks, feeling a small, unfamiliar warmth at their appreciation. After supper, when the dishes were done and the kitchen cleaned, Eleanor went upstairs to her room. She took out the blue ribbon Frank had bought her and held it up to the lamplight, watching how the color shifted and gleamed. It was beautiful, and it was hers, and she did not know what to do with the feeling that gave her. The next few weeks settled into a routine. Eleanor woke early, prepared breakfast, cleaned, prepared lunch, did laundry or mending, prepared supper, and then retired to her room. The work was constant but manageable, and she found a certain satisfaction in maintaining the household. Frank remained consistently cheerful, greeting her every morning with a smile and a genuine "good morning," asking about her day, trying to draw her into conversation. Eleanor kept her responses polite but brief, maintaining the distance she believed was appropriate. But Frank was persistent in his friendliness. He brought her wildflowers from the desert and placed them in a jar on the kitchen table. He fixed the loose hinge on her bedroom door without being asked. He made sure she had everything she needed before thinking of himself. He asked her opinion on small matters around the ranch, listened carefully to her responses, and often implemented her suggestions. Slowly, despite her best efforts to remain detached, Eleanor found herself noticing things about him. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at something one of the hands said, the gentleness with which he handled the horses, the patience he showed when teaching young Miguel a new skill, the way he whistled while he worked, always some cheerful tune. One evening in early June, after supper, Frank asked Eleanor if she would take a walk with him. She hesitated, uncertain of what such a request meant, but he looked so hopeful that she agreed. They walked away from the ranch house as the desert cooled from the day's heat. The sky was vast above them, beginning to fill with stars. Frank pointed out constellations, telling her their names and the stories associated with them. "My mother taught me those," he said softly. "She died when I was 12. She used to bring me out on nights like this and show me the stars. She said no matter how hard life got, the stars would always be there, constant and beautiful." "I am sorry you lost her," Eleanor said. "Thank you, I miss her still." He was quiet for a moment. "She was kind, like you." Eleanor stopped walking. "I am not kind." "Yes, you are. You just do not see it." "No, truly, I am not. I am practical and efficient, but not kind." Frank turned to face her fully, his expression serious for once. "Eleanor, you bake extra biscuits because you notice Jim prefers them to cornbread. You mended Miguel's shirt with blue thread because it is his favorite color, and you remembered him mentioning it. You leave wildflower seeds on the windowsill for the birds. Those are kind things." Eleanor felt something uncomfortable shifting in her chest. "Those are just practical considerations to maintain a pleasant household, if you say so." Frank smiled slightly. "But I think you are kinder than you give yourself credit for. And I think you have convinced yourself that you do not deserve kindness in return, which is why you seem so uncomfortable whenever anyone tries to be nice to you. You do not know me well enough to make such assessments. Maybe not, but I see you every day and I am learning." He started walking again and Eleanor followed. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I may not answer." "Fair enough. Were you happy in your marriage?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you have been here 6 weeks, and you have never once mentioned your late husband. You wear black because it is practical, not because you are mourning. And whenever anyone offers sympathy for your loss, you accept it like someone accepting a grocery list, politely but without emotion." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, defensive. "Not all marriages are love matches. I know, was yours?" "No." "Did he treat you well?" he treated me as was appropriate for a wife. That is not the same thing as treating you well." Eleanor stopped walking again, turning to face Frank with more intensity than she had shown since arriving. "Why does it matter? He is dead. It is over. And it was no worse than anything else in my life, so what difference does it make?" Frank looked at her with such compassion that Eleanor had to look away. "It makes a difference because you deserve better than no worse than anything else. You deserve to be happy. Happiness is not distributed based on deserving. Maybe not. But that does not mean you should stop trying to find it." Eleanor had no response to that. They stood in the desert darkness, the stars brilliant overhead, and she felt something cracking open inside her, some wall she had carefully maintained for years. She did not want it to crack. "Walls were safe. We should go back," she said abruptly. "It is getting late." Frank nodded, respecting her retreat. They walked back to the house in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Eleanor was too busy trying to reinforce her walls to notice that Frank kept glancing at her with concern. Over the following weeks, Frank continued his campaign of relentless kindness. He seemed to have made it his mission to coax some warmth, some joy, some spark of life out of Eleanor's careful composure. He told jokes at breakfast, trying to make her laugh. He asked her to help him with small tasks that did not really require assistance, like choosing which yearling calves to keep and which to sell, just so they could spend time together. He brought her books from his small collection, saying he thought she might enjoy them. Eleanor resisted, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Frank's presence was like sunlight wearing away at stone, persistent and patient and impossible to entirely shut out. She found herself listening for his footsteps in the morning, found her mood lifting slightly when he smiled at her, found herself thinking about him at odd moments during the day. It was dangerous. Caring about people led to disappointment. Hoping for happiness led to pain. She knew this from experience. But Frank kept smiling, kept trying, kept treating her like she mattered. One hot afternoon in late June, Eleanor was in the kitchen working on laundry when she heard shouting from outside. She rushed to the window and saw Frank and the hands running toward the nearest corral, where one of the horses was clearly in distress. The mare was lying on her side, her barrel swollen, laboring to breathe. Eleanor hurried outside without thinking, arriving at the corral as Frank was kneeling beside the horse, his hands gentle on her neck. The mare was trying to give birth, but something was clearly wrong. "The foal is breech," Frank said grimly to Jim. "I need to turn it or we will lose them both." Eleanor watched as Frank worked with calm efficiency despite the horse's pain and fear. His voice was soothing, his movements careful, and after what seemed like an eternity, he managed to reposition the foal. The mare gave a final great push, and suddenly there was a new life in the world, a spindly-legged foal struggling to stand while its mother whinnied softly. Frank sat back on his heels, covered in sweat and blood, and the smile that broke across his face was incandescent with joy. "There you are, little one. Welcome." Eleanor felt something break inside her, all those carefully maintained walls crumbling under the weight of that smile, that genuine, unguarded happiness at bringing new life into the world. Frank cared so much, about everything and everyone without reservation or self-protection. He was not afraid of being hurt. He was not afraid of hoping. And Eleanor realized with a sudden clarity that was almost painful that she was in love with him. The revelation should have terrified her, but instead it just felt inevitable, like something that had been true for a while that she had simply refused to acknowledge. Of course she loved him. He was everything she was not, hopeful, kind, open. He made the world seem less harsh simply by existing in it, but loving him changed nothing. Eleanor knew her place. She was the housekeeper, the widow with no prospects, the woman who had spent her entire life being unwanted. Frank was kind to everyone. His friendliness toward her was just his nature, not any particular regard for her specifically. She would not be foolish enough to imagine otherwise. Frank looked up and caught her watching him. His smile softened into something more personal, meant just for her. "Did you see? We saved them both." "I saw. You did well. Come meet them properly." Eleanor climbed into the corral and approached the mare and foal. Frank introduced her to them as if they were people, his hand gentle on the foal's tiny muzzle. "This is Eleanor. She's going to make sure I do not work myself to exhaustion checking on you two every hour." The foal nuzzled Frank's hand, and he laughed with pure delight. Eleanor watched him and thought, "I love you." The words were so clear in her mind that she almost said them aloud, but she caught herself. Such words would only create awkwardness and discomfort. Better to keep them locked inside. That evening, Frank was still riding high on the success of the birth. At supper, he talked animatedly about the foal, making plans for its training, discussing bloodlines with the hands. Eleanor watched him from her seat at the table, memorizing the planes of his face, the sound of his laugh, the way his hands moved when he talked. After supper, when they were alone in the kitchen, Frank said, "Thank you for coming out earlier. It helped to have you there." "I did not do anything." "You were there. That counts." He was washing dishes while she dried, working side by side in companionable silence. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Have you been happy here? These past 2 months?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. Happy was such a large word, encompassing so much she did not know how to feel. But there had been moments, she realized, small instants of something lighter than her usual gray existence. Moments watching Frank with the horses. Moments listening to the hands' laughter at supper. Moments standing in the desert at sunrise, watching the sky turn colors she had never noticed before. "It has been acceptable," she said, because she could not quite bring herself to claim happiness. Frank turned to look at her fully, setting down the plate he had been washing. "Just acceptable." "It has been more than acceptable, it has been good." The admission felt like too much, so she added, "You are a fair employer." "Eleanor, I am not just your employer. I thought we were becoming friends." "Friends." The word was so simple, but it carried implications Eleanor was not sure how to handle. She had never had a friend. She did not know how to be a friend. And friendship with Frank seemed impossible when what she felt for him was so much larger and more complicated than that simple word. "I suppose we are," she said carefully. Frank looked disappointed, though he tried to hide it. "You suppose? I do not have much experience with friendship." "Then let me teach you." He smiled, and there it was again, that relentless warmth. "First lesson, friends talk to each other honestly." "So I will be honest with you. I like having you here. Not just because you cook and clean, but because you are you. I like your dry observations. I like the way you notice small details. I like talking to you, even when you only give me 3-word answers. You make this house feel like a home in a way it never did before." Eleanor felt panic rising in her chest. This was too much, too close to hope. "You do not need to say such things. I am not saying them because I need to. I am saying them because they are true." "Frank." His name came out almost pleading, though she was not sure what she was pleading for. For him to stop, maybe. For him to continue. For this conversation to never end and also to be over immediately. He stepped closer, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really listen." "Can you do that?" Eleanor nodded, mute. "When you first arrived, I thought you were just reserved, maybe shy. But over these past months, I have realized it is more than that. You do not believe you deserve kindness or happiness or joy. You move through life like you are apologizing for existing. And I do not know what happened to you before you came here. What series of terrible people convinced you that you are not worth caring about, but they were wrong. Do you hear me? They were wrong. Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes, hot and unexpected. She never cried. Crying was useless. You do not understand. Then help me understand. I have been a burden my entire life, passed from relative to relative because no one wanted the responsibility of raising me. I was married to a man who saw me as unpaid domestic help. I have never been good enough, never been worth keeping. And that is just reality. It is not self-pity, it is just truth. It is the truth about those people and their failures, Frank said intensely. It is not truth about you. You are good, Eleanor. You are valuable. You deserve happiness. And I wish you could see yourself the way I see you. A tear escaped, running down Eleanor's cheek. She wiped it away angrily. How do you see me? Frank reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed away another tear with his thumb. His touch was so tender it made Eleanor's chest ache. I see someone strong and brave who survived a lifetime of people failing her. I see someone who is kind even though she was never shown kindness. I see someone who deserves all the joy in the world. I do not know how to be that person. You already are that person. You just need to believe it. His hand was still cupped against her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Let me teach you happiness again. Let me show you that you are worthy of joy. Please. Eleanor closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite her better judgment. This was everything she had been afraid of: hope, connection, the possibility of something more, but Frank was asking and she could not seem to refuse him. I do not know how, she whispered. We will figure it out together, one smile at a time. She could hear the smile in his voice. Starting with this. Will you come to the town dance with me on Saturday? Not as my housekeeper, but as my guest. Eleanor opened her eyes and found herself looking directly into Frank's, those blue-green depths full of hope and warmth, and something that looked dangerously like affection. I do not dance. Neither do I, really. We will be terrible together, he grinned. Please, she should say no, this was a mistake. But looking at Frank, at his open, honest face, Eleanor found herself nodding. All right. Frank's smile was brilliant, and he surprised her by pulling her into a hug, strong arms wrapping around her. Eleanor stiffened in shock at the contact, but then slowly, carefully, she let herself relax into it. He was warm and solid, and he smelled like horses and leather and sun-warmed cotton. She let herself have this moment, pressing her face briefly against his shoulder before pulling back. Thank you, Frank said softly. You will not regret this. Eleanor was not so sure about that, but she did not say so. The next few days passed in a strange blur. Eleanor found herself more aware of Frank than ever, noticing everything. The way he pushed his hair back when he was concentrating, the way he spoke gently to the animals, the way he always made sure she had eaten before he took his own meals. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression thoughtful and tender, and had to look away from the intensity of it. The other hands noticed the shift between them and exchanged knowing looks. Jim pulled Eleanor aside one afternoon while she was hanging laundry and said quietly, Frank is a good man, the best I have known. If you are going to break his heart, do it soon before he gets in too deep. I would not, Eleanor said, stung. I have no intention of hurting him. Did not say you had intention, but you guard yourself so carefully and Frank feels so openly. Just be mindful is all. Jim's expression softened. For what it is worth, I think you are good for him. He is happier than I have seen him in years. That knowledge sat uncomfortably with Eleanor. She did not want to be responsible for Frank's happiness. The weight of it seemed too much. Saturday arrived too quickly. Eleanor dressed in her best dress, a simple gray cotton that was at least not black, and braided her hair, using the blue ribbon Frank had bought her to tie the end of the braid. It was a small vanity, but she wanted to acknowledge his gift. When she came downstairs, Frank was waiting in the sitting room wearing clean trousers and a white shirt, his hair neatly combed. His face lit up when he saw her, and his eyes went immediately to the ribbon. "You look beautiful," he said. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. You look presentable as well," he laughed. "Presentable, I will take it." He offered his arm. Ready, they rode to Hachita in the wagon, the evening air cooling as the sun lowered. Eleanor was nervous, though she tried not to show it. She had been to dances before, forced into attendance by various relatives, and they had always been exercises in awkward isolation. She would stand against the wall while others danced and laughed and enjoyed themselves, a reminder of her own separateness. But arriving with Frank was different. People greeted them warmly, and Frank kept Eleanor at his side, introducing her proudly to everyone they met. The dance was held in the town's small meeting hall, with lanterns hung from the rafters and a group of musicians in the corner playing fiddle tunes. Frank led Eleanor to the refreshment table and got them both punch, then found them seats near the edge of the room. He chatted easily with neighbors, but he always included Eleanor in the conversation, asking her opinion, making sure she felt part of things. When the dancing started, Frank stood and offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand and felt panic flutter in her chest. "I really do not dance well." "Good thing I do not care about dancing well, I just care about dancing with you." His smile was gentle. "Come on, I promise not to step on your feet more than 3 or 4 times." She took his hand and let him lead her to the floor. He placed one hand on her waist and took her other hand in his, and they began to move to the music. Frank had been right. He was not a particularly skilled dancer. But he moved with confidence anyway, guiding Eleanor through the steps, unbothered when they occasionally stumbled. "See, not so terrible," Frank said, smiling down at her. Eleanor realized she was smiling back just slightly, the expression feeling strange on her face. "It is tolerable." "Tolerable," Frank repeated, amused. "That is the nicest thing you have ever said about something I suggested." They danced several more times throughout the evening, and Eleanor found herself relaxing incrementally. Frank's hand was warm on her waist, his presence steady and reassuring. Other couples swirled around them, and the fiddle music filled the hall with cheerful energy. Between dances, Frank introduced Eleanor to more people. Samuel Peterson, the older rancher he had mentioned before, and his wife Mary. The Martinez brothers and their families. Reverend Matthews and his sister. Everyone was kind, welcoming, treating Eleanor like she belonged. During a pause in the music, Mary Peterson pulled Eleanor aside. "I am so glad Frank brought you tonight. He has been alone too long." "We are not," Eleanor started, but Mary waved her hand. "Oh, I know you are not officially courting yet, but that boy looks at you like you hung the moon and you watch him when you think no one is looking. It is sweet." Mary smiled. "Frank deserves happiness. His father was a cruel man who made Frank's life miserable. Whatever kindness you can give him, please do. He will treasure it." Eleanor did not know what to say to that. The idea that she could give anything of value to someone like Frank seemed absurd, but Mary seemed sincere. As the evening grew late, Frank suggested they head back. They said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon for the ride home. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky. Frank was humming one of the fiddle tunes, and Eleanor found herself humming along without thinking about it. Frank glanced at her in surprise and delight. "You are humming." Eleanor stopped immediately. "Sorry. No, do not apologize. It is wonderful. I did not know you could carry a tune. I do not usually." "Well, I like it." Frank was quiet for a moment, then said, "Did you have a good time tonight?" Eleanor considered the question honestly. "Yes, I did. I am glad. You smiled a few times. It was nice to see." They arrived back at the ranch, and Frank helped Eleanor down from the wagon. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary before he released her. They walked to the house together, and at the door, Frank turned to face her. "Thank you for coming with me tonight. It meant a lot. Thank you for inviting me." They stood there in the darkness, the space between them charged with something Eleanor could not quite name. Frank reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers grazing her cheek. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it. Can you do that?" "Yes," she whispered. "I am falling in love with you. Actually, I think I have already fallen. I have been trying to show you over these past months, trying to be patient, but I do not want there to be any confusion about how I feel." His voice was steady, certain. "I know you do not think you deserve love or happiness, but you are wrong. And I want to spend however long it takes proving that to you." Eleanor felt like she could not breathe. "Frank, I am not the kind of woman men fall in love with. You are exactly the kind of woman I fall in love with. Kind, strong, resilient, beautiful. I am broken. You are not broken. You are healing. There is a difference." He cupped her face gently with both hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Let me help you heal. Let me love you, please." Eleanor felt tears spilling down her cheeks again, all the emotions she had been holding back for so long overwhelming her at once. "I do not know how to be loved. You do not have to know. You just have to let me try." Frank was crying too now, his eyes bright with tears. "I see you, Eleanor. Not the person you think you are supposed to be, but the person you actually are, and that person is worthy of everything good." "I love you," Eleanor said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I have loved you for weeks, but I did not think I had any right to feel that way." Frank's smile was incandescent. You have every right to feel anything you want to feel." He leaned in slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away. But Eleanor did not pull away. She rose on her toes and closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home, like being found after a lifetime of being lost. Frank kissed her gently at first, then with growing intensity, his arms wrapping around her and pulling her close. Eleanor clung to him, letting herself feel all the things she had been denying: love and hope and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of joy. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Frank rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me, not as my housekeeper, but as my partner, my love, my future wife if you will have me. You want to marry me?" Eleanor's voice was incredulous, more than anything. "I know it is fast, but I also know my own heart. I want to spend my life with you if you will let me." Eleanor thought about all the reasons she should say no. She was damaged, unworthy, destined to disappoint him. But looking into Frank's eyes, she saw only love and certainty and unwavering faith in her. And she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to see herself the way he saw her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Frank kissed her again, and then he laughed, the sound pure joy. "You just made me the happiest man alive." They stood there on the porch for a long time, holding each other, and Eleanor felt something she had not felt in longer than she could remember: peace. Frank had promised to teach her happiness again, and in that moment, wrapped in his arms under the vast desert sky, she thought perhaps she was finally ready to learn. The next morning, Frank announced their engagement to the ranch hands, who responded with enthusiastic congratulations. Jim shook Frank's hand and told Eleanor, "I am glad you are staying. You are good for this place." They decided to marry quickly, not seeing any reason to wait. Reverend Matthews agreed to perform the ceremony, and they set the date for 3 weeks away, which would give them time to make minimal preparations. Eleanor found herself swept up in a whirlwind of activity. Mary Peterson took her under her wing, helping her plan the small wedding and offering her own wedding dress for Eleanor to wear. The Martinez brothers donated beef for the celebration meal. The entire community, small as it was, rallied around them with a warmth that left Eleanor overwhelmed. "Why is everyone being so kind?" she asked Frank one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Because they care about us, because this is what community does." Frank took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "You are not alone anymore, Eleanor. You have me, and you have all of them. Family is not just blood. It is the people who choose to love you." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, still getting used to the idea that she was allowed to be physically affectionate, that she was wanted. "I am afraid I am going to wake up and discover this is all a dream." "It is not a dream, I promise." He kissed the top of her head. "And even if you do wake up, I will be right here beside you." They spent the next weeks in a haze of preparation and deepening connection. Frank taught Eleanor to ride horses properly, not just sitting in a wagon but actually riding. They would go out in the early mornings before the heat of the day, riding across the desert while Frank pointed out plants and animals and told her stories about the land. He also made good on his promise to teach her happiness. Small things, like stopping to watch a roadrunner dart across the path, or lying in the grass to watch clouds drift by, or picking wildflowers just because they were pretty. Frank approached life with a sense of wonder that Eleanor found both foreign and contagious. "You act like everything is a gift," she told him once. "Because it is," Frank said simply. "Every day I wake up, every sunrise, every good meal, every moment with you, all gifts. Why would I take any of it for granted?" Eleanor was slowly learning to see the world through his eyes. It was not easy. Years of conditioning herself to expect nothing did not disappear overnight. But Frank was patient, celebrating every small moment when Eleanor let herself feel joy without immediately shutting it down. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. Eleanor woke early in her room, which would be her room for one final night before she moved into Frank's room as his wife. She dressed in Mary's borrowed wedding dress, a simple white cotton gown with lace at the collar and cuffs. She wore her hair down for once, loose around her shoulders, with small wildflowers tucked into it. When she came downstairs, Frank was waiting in his best suit, and the look on his face when he saw her made Eleanor's breath catch. He looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They walked to the church together, hand in hand. The whole town seemed to have turned out for the wedding, the small church packed with people. Reverend Matthews performed a simple, heartfelt ceremony, and when it came time for the vows, Frank took both of Eleanor's hands and spoke with clear conviction. "Eleanor, I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to remind you of your worth whenever you forget. I promise to share your burdens and multiply your joys. I promise to be patient and kind and true. I promise to smile for you and to teach you to smile with me until happiness becomes as natural to you as breathing." Eleanor's voice shook as she spoke her own vows. "Frank, I promise to try to see myself as you see me. I promise to let you love me, even when I do not understand why you do. I promise to care for you and support you and stand beside you. I promise to learn joy from you and to share whatever happiness I find. I promise to be yours, completely and without reservation." Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, and Frank kissed Eleanor with such tenderness that several people in the congregation sighed. Eleanor kissed him back, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The celebration after was held in the meeting hall, with food and music and dancing. Eleanor danced with Frank repeatedly, caring less and less about whether she was doing it correctly and more about the feeling of being in his arms. She also danced with Jim, who told her gruffly that Frank was lucky to have her. She danced with each of the Martinez brothers, who welcomed her to their community with genuine warmth. As evening fell and people began heading home, Frank pulled Eleanor aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Oakes." The name sent a thrill through Eleanor. Mrs. Oakes. She was someone's wife again, but this time it meant something entirely different. This time it meant she was loved. They rode back to the ranch under the stars, Frank driving the wagon with one hand so he could keep the other wrapped around Eleanor's. When they arrived, he helped her down and then, without warning, swept her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked, startled. "Carrying my bride over the threshold. It is tradition." Frank grinned at her and carried her into the house, kicking the door closed behind them. He set her down gently in the sitting room, then cupped her face in his hands. "Hello, wife." "Hello, husband," Eleanor said, the word feeling strange and wonderful in her mouth. Frank kissed her slowly, thoroughly, and Eleanor felt heat building between them. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire but also questioning. "Are you tired? We can wait if you need to." Eleanor thought about that. Her first marriage had involved perfunctory, uncomfortable intimacy that she had endured rather than enjoyed. But looking at Frank, thinking about his gentleness and patience, she felt curiosity rather than dread. "I am not tired," she said quietly. Frank smiled and took her hand, leading her upstairs to his room, which was now their room. He lit a lamp, casting soft light across the space, then turned to Eleanor and began carefully removing the wildflowers from her hair, setting each one on the dresser with care. His fingers were gentle as they worked through her hair, and Eleanor found herself relaxing under his touch. "You are so beautiful," Frank murmured. "I still cannot believe you are mine." "I am yours," Eleanor confirmed, "and you are mine." "Completely yours," Frank agreed. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands moving to the buttons of her dress. He undid them slowly, giving her time to object, but Eleanor did not want to object. She wanted him, wanted to learn this new language of physical love with someone who actually cared for her. They made love slowly, Frank taking his time to ensure Eleanor's comfort and pleasure, murmuring words of love and praise against her skin. Eleanor had not known intimacy could be like this, tender and passionate and connecting. She had not known her own body could feel such things. Afterward they lay tangled together, Frank's arms wrapped around her, and Eleanor felt safe in a way she never had before. "I love you," Frank whispered into her hair. "I love you too," Eleanor whispered back and meant it with every fiber of her being. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Eleanor's life, though adjusting to that happiness was its own challenge. She still had days where she struggled to believe she deserved this, where she waited for something terrible to happen, where she fell back into old patterns of making herself small and unobtrusive. But Frank was always there, gentle and patient, reminding her that she was allowed to take up space, to have needs, to be fully herself. They settled into a rhythm of partnership. Eleanor still managed the house, but Frank shared the work more equally, never treating her like unpaid labor. They made decisions together about the ranch, Frank genuinely valuing her input. They took their meals together, just the two of them now that Eleanor was no longer the housekeeper but Frank's wife. The hands ate in the bunkhouse, giving Frank and Eleanor privacy. Frank continued his mission of teaching Eleanor to find joy in small things. He would surprise her with little gifts. A smooth stone he found that caught the light beautifully. A book he thought she would enjoy. A particularly perfect biscuit he saved from his breakfast. He made her laugh with his terrible jokes and gentle teasing. He held her when she cried, which happened more often now that she was allowing herself to feel emotions instead of suppressing them. One evening in early October, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Eleanor said suddenly, "I think I am happy." Frank turned to her with a brilliant smile. "You think I am? I am happy." Eleanor said it with more certainty this time, testing the words, finding them true. "It still feels strange, like I am waiting for something to ruin it. Nothing is going to ruin it. Life will have hard moments, sure, but the foundation we have is solid." Frank took her hand. "You deserve this happiness, Eleanor. You have always deserved it." "I am starting to believe that," Eleanor admitted. "Some days more than others. That is enough, as long as you are starting to believe it." Frank pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You know what would make me even happier?" "What?" "A family. Children." He looked at her carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. "Someday, when you are ready. I am not rushing you." Eleanor had not thought much about children. Her marriage to Gerald had been so brief and so devoid of genuine intimacy that pregnancy had never been a real possibility. But thinking about it now, about having children with Frank, she felt a tentative warmth spreading through her chest. "I think I would like that," she said softly. "Someday." "Someday," Frank agreed, kissing her temple. "We have all the time in the world." As it turned out, someday came sooner than they expected. By November, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She told Frank one morning over breakfast, nervous about his reaction even though he had said he wanted children. Frank's face transformed with joy. He stood up so fast he nearly knocked his chair over, came around the table and pulled Eleanor into a fierce hug. "Really, we are going to have a baby?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, and then she was crying, though she was not entirely sure why. Happy tears, she thought. She was still learning to recognize those. Frank held her, laughing and crying himself. "This is the best news. We are going to be parents." The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor struggled with sickness and exhaustion, and there were days when she felt overwhelmed by the physical changes happening to her body. But Frank was attentive and supportive, taking over more of the household tasks, making sure Eleanor rested, bringing her tea and crackers when she felt ill. As her belly grew, Frank would talk to their unborn child, his hands spread across Eleanor's stomach, telling stories about the ranch and the desert and all the things he wanted to teach them. Eleanor would watch him, still amazed that this was her life, that she was loved like this. "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Frank asked one evening. "I do not have a preference," Eleanor said. "As long as the baby is healthy. Same here, though I think a girl would be nice, a little daughter who looks like you." Frank smiled. "She would be beautiful and smart and strong." "She would have your smile," Eleanor said. "Your kindness." "Our child will have the best of both of us," Frank said confidently. "And we will make sure they always know they are loved and wanted. They will never doubt their worth." Eleanor placed her hand over Frank's where it rested on her belly. "No, they will never doubt that." Winter passed into spring, and in late April, Eleanor went into labor. Mary Peterson came to help, as did the doctor from Deeming who Frank had arranged to be present for the birth. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Eleanor was certain she could not continue. But Frank stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, refusing to leave even when Mary suggested he might want to wait elsewhere. Finally, after hours of struggle, Eleanor heard a sharp cry and Mary announced, "It is a boy. You have a son." The baby was placed in Eleanor's arms, a tiny, red-faced creature who was absolutely perfect. Eleanor looked down at him, overwhelmed with love so fierce it almost frightened her. This was her son, her child, a person who would never doubt he was wanted, never question his worth. Frank leaned over, tears streaming down his face, and touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Hello, little one. I am your father, and this is your mother. We have been waiting for you." They named him Henry Thomas Oakes. Henry after Frank's grandfather, who had been kind to him as a child, and Thomas after one of the ranch hands who had become a good friend. Henry was a good baby, fussy sometimes but generally content, and Eleanor discovered a fierce protective love she had not known she was capable of feeling. Watching Frank with their son was a revelation. He was gentle and patient, changing diapers and walking the floor with Henry when he cried at night, singing to him in his off-key voice. He was a natural father, and seeing him with Henry made Eleanor fall even more deeply in love with him. "You are wonderful with him," Eleanor told Frank one night as he rocked Henry to sleep. "He is my son. How could I be anything else?" Frank looked up at her and smiled. "We made him, Eleanor. We made this perfect little person. That is pretty amazing." "It is," Eleanor agreed. She sat beside Frank and leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their son sleep. "I never thought I could have this. A family, a home, happiness. But you do have it. You have all of it, and you deserve every bit." Frank kissed her softly. "Are you happy?" Eleanor considered the question, really considered it. She thought about the scared, sad woman who had arrived at this ranch 2 years ago, certain she was unworthy of joy. She thought about how Frank had patiently, persistently taught her that she was wrong, that happiness was not just for other people, that she deserved love and kindness and all the good things life could offer. "Yes," she said firmly. "I am happy, truly, genuinely happy." Frank's smile was radiant. "Good. That is all I have ever wanted." As Henry grew, Eleanor and Frank expanded their family and their ranch. 2 years after Henry's birth, they had a daughter named Caroline, who had Frank's blue-green eyes and Eleanor's serious expression. 3 years after that came another son, William, who was cheerful and energetic from birth. The ranch prospered under Frank's management and Eleanor's support. They expanded their herd, built a new barn, and hired additional hands as needed. The community of Hatcheater remained small but close-knit, and Frank and Eleanor became central figures in it, known for their kindness and generosity. Eleanor never entirely lost the shadows of her difficult past, but they faded into background noise rather than defining her entire existence. She had moments of doubt, days when old fears resurfaced, times when she struggled to believe she was truly worthy of the life she had built. But Frank was always there, as patient and loving as ever, reminding her of the truth. Their children grew up secure in their parents' love, never doubting their worth or their place in the world. Eleanor made sure of that, determined that her children would never feel the way she had felt as a child. She told them every day that they were loved, that they mattered, that they could do anything they set their minds to. One evening, when Eleanor was 45 and Frank was 47, they sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Henry had married a few years earlier and had 2 children of his own. Caroline was engaged to a young rancher from a neighboring property. William was still young, just 16, but already showing signs of being a natural cattleman like his father. "Did you ever imagine this?" Eleanor asked Frank. "All those years ago, I imagined hoping for it," Frank said, "but I did not know if it would actually happen. I am grateful every day that it did. I am grateful, too, for all of it, but especially for you." Eleanor took his hand, still rough and calloused from ranch work. "You saved me, you know. When I came here, I was barely living. You taught me how to be alive again." "You saved yourself," Frank corrected gently. "I just helped you remember that you could." Eleanor leaned against him, watching the sun set over the desert that had become her home. The landscape that had once seemed harsh and unforgiving now appeared beautiful, full of subtle colors and quiet strength. Like her, it had learned to bloom in unexpected places. "I love you," Eleanor said. "I do not say it enough, but I do, more than I can express. I know. And I love you too, more every day." Frank kissed her forehead. "Thank you for letting me teach you happiness again. Thank you for being patient enough to do it." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sky turned orange and pink and purple, surrounded by the family they had built, the life they had created together. Eleanor thought about the telegram that had arrived so many years ago, informing her of Gerald's death, and how she had thought it was just another confirmation that joy was not meant for her. How wrong she had been. Joy had been waiting for her all along, in the form of a smiling cowboy with blue-green eyes and unwavering faith in her worth. Frank had seen her when she could not see herself, had loved her when she did not know how to be loved, had taught her that happiness was not a limited resource, but an infinite possibility available to anyone willing to accept it. Eleanor had learned that lesson well. She had learned to smile, to laugh, to find joy in sunsets and wildflowers and the sound of her children's laughter. She had learned that she was worthy of love, that her existence was not a burden but a gift, that she deserved every good thing life had given her. Most importantly, she had learned that it was never too late to change, to grow, to become the person you were always meant to be. With Frank's help, Eleanor had transformed from a woman who thought she was unworthy of joy into a woman who carried joy with her wherever she went, who shared it generously with everyone she met, who knew down to her bones that she was valuable and loved. It had not been easy. Unlearning a lifetime of negative beliefs never was. But Frank had been there every step of the way, smiling his patient smile, offering his steady support, teaching her day by day how to be happy again. And Eleanor had learned. She had learned so well that sometimes she could hardly remember that scared, sad woman who had arrived at the ranch so many years ago. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from a different life entirely. This was her life now. This ranch, this family, this love, this happiness. And Eleanor finally believed without doubt or reservation that she deserved every bit of it. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Frank stood and offered Eleanor his hand. Ready to go inside, Eleanor took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Yes. They walked inside together, hand in hand, still smiling at each other after all these years. Behind them, the desert stretched out under the vast sky, beautiful and unforgiving and full of unexpected possibilities, waiting patiently for the next lost soul who needed to learn that happiness was always within reach, that joy was never reserved for others, that everyone, absolutely everyone, deserved to bloom.